Hi, and welcome to Infinite Hope's first podcast. This is part one in a series of three podcasts looking at the impact of sexual violence. I have interviewed three clients who have courageously come forward to have their experiences put out into the world of understanding their experience of sexual violence and gaining support and on their journey to heal. I haven't put a trigger warning at the front of these podcasts because I've carefully selected questions that don't talk directly about the incidents that these people have experienced, but instead talk around their understanding of what happened to them being sexual violence, their barriers and boundaries to getting support, and how they eventually sort it out, and maybe a little bit about where they are now. I hope you enjoy it. Please keep yourself safe. If these stories are similar to your own, please reach out for support if you need it. But thank you for listening, and thank you to Client A for bravely agreeing to
So,
take part.
thank you for agreeing to do this because I know it's not easy to always talk about your experiences, but my hope is that the more people that can voice what's happened to them and their own experiences, the more people feel like they can come forward and talk and share their experiences to get help. So obviously you're anonymised for today, so I'm going to call you Client A if that's okay.
Okay.
No
Yeah.
identifiables. So I just really wondered if we could start with, did you recognise your experience as sexual violence straight away after it had happened?
No, definitely not. It probably took me about 4 or 5 years to understand that it was sexual violence. Everyone around me was saying that it was sexual violence, grooming to be specific. But no, I did not recognise it. I was in complete denial.
Was it hard to hear it talked about in the terms of sexual violence then, if it didn't feel like that was the relationship that had happened?
Yes, 1,000%. I was head over heels in love, in my opinion. It wasn't until I actually understood and broke down everything through counselling that I then understood that it was sexual violence, but it took a very long time.
Did it feel, with people around you saying it, did it feel like you had much control over what happens on the
Oh
legal?
no, definitely not. I was also underage, so obviously you always had to have like a parent or a guardian with you. Obviously not in the counselling sessions, but it was very monitored, so it did not feel like any control whatsoever was from my behalf.
And that feels really hard because it feels like you're saying it was a relationship that suddenly ended, I'm guessing then. And so you had this title of something that's happened to you and the end of a relationship, but without any understanding that it was what it was.
Yeah, definitely. And you don't really get much, like, you don't speak much about that in schools, so you don't have any idea that it's happening to you until obviously it's happened and then reflecting on it years later. So it was very hard thinking their relationship has just then completely stopped.
Yeah, and I think the thing we don't talk about in terms of grooming is how it can be quite normal to miss the person that you've had the relationship with, even though that, it's a power imbalance and actually it does fall under the umbrella of sexual violence and it's not okay. It's still quite normal, I think, to be on the other side of that relationship and think, well, that was my boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, friend, person that I loved and trusted, and they've suddenly disappeared. That must be really hard to reconcile with.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was quite lucky in the sense that my mum reported it. Obviously, I didn't agree with that at the time because I thought she was just being mean and trying to ruin the relationship. But she took great care of me. She moved me to another country because I was constantly trying to get in touch with the person. So I was really lucky in the sense that I had a lot of support around me. Obviously, I didn't see it at the time. But yeah, she definitely do miss it. And I was trying to write letters, get them to give to my sister, to give them to her. I was trying everything possible to get in contact with the person. So yeah, it's quite hard to then all of a sudden stop when you speak to that person like every day to then go from 100% to nothing. Yeah, you definitely do miss them. Even now, like flashbacks and things like that, you kind of, it comes back to be like, I miss that thrill. I miss that relationship.
Yeah, and I think about just that sense of moving. I'm going to ask some questions about support in a little while, but it feels like moving away was the only way to sort of detach. But even then, it was like, how can I find ways to, speak to them? How can I get letters to them? How can I, keep that relationship going? And you said that, obviously you were really lucky to have the support around you. You did. at the time though, did it feel like support, or did it feel like?
Oh no, no, definitely not. It felt like I was in a prison, to be honest with you. Like, I did not see it as support. Obviously, reflecting back now, I do, but at the time, I completely fell out with my mum. I shut down completely. I wouldn't really speak to anyone, teachers, parents, nothing. I felt very alone in that sense because no one could see it through my eyes.
Yeah, and I was wondering about that because obviously when you see things about grooming online, they always depict the hard stuff. So they always show the worst parts. So they show the abuse that can be, things like presents, and then how they recoup what they've given you back, or they show the gang scenario. But when it's one to one, I think it's sometimes harder to see it for grooming because it feels like a natural relationship. Do you feel there's anything that you've seen online or sort of on these campaigns that reflects your experience?
No, not really at all. It's always the really well-known cases, or something that's like, well, why would someone even do that kind of thing? Those type of cases, it's never really just a relationship.
But actually, I would argue that you can't have anyone in a grooming situation if there is no relationship, and that's where it starts. So I think that's really something powerful for people to think about, is when we are, in weeks like this week where it's all about people's experience of sexual violence and trying to get people to find that common ground, are we doing enough to reflect everyone's experience? Because I find this a lot when it's a particular campaign that we go hard at it, the really difficult end of the spectrum, which is important to show. But then I think it feels like people get lost, their story gets lost along the way.
Yeah, definitely. But I can see that it is trying to improve. Like, when that happened to me, the grooming, there was like no information whatsoever. Whereas now you find like rape leaflets at the back of toilets and things like that. So you can see that they are trying, but yeah, it's going to take quite a few years to get everyone's opinions and stories out so people can understand that that's what's happening.
Yeah, and I think, hopefully as time goes along, just the way you said those conversations at school weren't happening about grooming, hopefully we're seeing small improvements. But it's still hard when you've had that experience, I think, not to have something instantly that reflects yours.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so it sounds like your mum was a really good support and kind of stepped in. But with support in mind, when did you decide to reach out for support or engage in support? Because if you're underage, I think that's a different question,
Yeah, so obviously when I was underage, it was instantly, because I didn't really get much of a choice about that. But then after I became 18, I then obviously found myself, and I then ended up coming back to you because I've now noticed what my triggers are when I'm feeling low, and I knew that I needed additional help just to speak to someone rather than trying to deal with it on my own. So, to be fair, it was kind of good that I was kind of forced into counselling when I was younger, because now I know when I need help and when to reach out.
Which is really powerful, isn't it? And I think it can be hard. And as a therapist, when someone's sent to counselling, when they come to you because they have to be there, it's a very difficult relationship because it takes so much courage anyway to talk about your experience. But I think when you feel like, oh, I've been made to do this, I've got to do this, there's a hesitancy to engage. So did you feel like when you first came to counselling, because I know, we met through a different centre, so you didn't see me initially. Did you feel like it was harder to engage in the beginning stages because you were being sent?
Oh, definitely. I think I went through about 6 counsellors before I came to you, and I just sat in the room for the hour. I didn't speak. And then even I think when I did start going to sessions with you, for the first few, I just didn't talk because it was kind of like, I don't trust them,
Well,
at all.
again, you've come from this relationship that's complex. This was a person who groomed you, who you were told you could trust, who you gained feelings for, and then they're suddenly out your life. And I think the counselling relationship is intimate in a different way. Obviously, there's no physicality, but we're sitting there asking you to tell us your story, or share your story, or share parts of your story, or share what you can. And that takes a lot of courage. And yeah, there was definitely a switch after a few sessions, but I think it was
Yeah.
good that you felt that you could engage. And I also think sometimes it's knowing where to access support. Obviously, in your circumstance, it was kind of, you were kind of given it, made to do that. But as an adult, was it quite hard to know, obviously when you'd finished at the centre, was it quite hard to know then where to access support and how to get it?
Yes, because you don't really know what's for kids, what's for adults, you know, it's not really that clear. A lot of them have like sexual violence help, but not for who. And obviously I was in the children's section when I went last time. So I ended up calling them, asking for you, because I did not want to go through another 6 counsellors again. And then obviously they told me that you went private. But yeah, so I kind of already knew where to start. But I think if they had told me, oh no, that's just for children, I probably would have just given up, because it's like, where do I look? Where do I turn?
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if there is enough free resources online to tell you how to cope with the moments while you're not in therapy or can't find therapy, or let's be really honest, can't afford therapy. You know,
Yeah.
the services that are, like rape crisis centres that are free, they'll have huge waiting lists. I don't know if you saw recently, but in the news this week, Coventry Rape Crisis Centre has had £200,000 cut from its budget, and there's 500 people on the waiting list because the pressure on these services is so great that there's kind of, I feel like we're kind of missing a middle ground where either you're on a waiting list or can't access because of money or travel or whatever. And yet I wonder where to go if you need breathing techniques or someone to hear you. So do you feel like there is enough out there that's for the middle part?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's loads of like them online chats that you can sit there and chat with for hours on end, but who wants to sit there and type the whole life story out over text?
Yeah.
And I think, no, I don't think there is enough resources, especially for the middle ground. But like you said, it's already been budgets cut. So what else can be done?
Yeah, I think it's really sad that we're in a situation where there is no statutory services that offer specialised therapy for sexual violence, and so they rely very heavily on charities of the third sector, as it's sort of known. But the demand for charity work is so huge, and then obviously the waiting lists are long. People have to close the waiting lists. You know, if you're and just the stat of 500 people on a waiting list, and there's probably 12 to 14 counsellors, you cannot manage that in a short space of time, and it's not really anyone's fault, it's the situation we're in. So I personally would like to see more input from the NHS or a government initiative where, you know, specialist trained therapists are supported, because we can't also ask IEP therapists or someone who's trained in a different specialism to pick this up, because I think specialised training is important. Would you agree with that? Do you think that you need to have special training to work with this?
Oh yes, definitely. Someone who you can definitely relate to as well, you know, because everyone can say everything you want to hear, but unless you see the progress, you know, and that's what you'd get from a specialist trained person, you're not going to improve.
Yeah, and I think that's important actually, because one thing that I used to struggle with when I worked for Rape Crisis was the lack of choice clients had. So as therapists, we get matched to clients, but they wouldn't have, you know, they might be able to say, actually, I don't like this person, can I try again? But I think it was often very small chance of seeing somebody else without a wait, or, you know, without a break. And then it's kind of difficult to feel like you're not being left behind. And, you know, again, it's no criticism on the charities, because they have to, you know, get through those caseloads because people can't wait for years. But it's quite challenging, I think, to be you know, on the other end of that, to be the client that, you know, especially when you have gone through something like grooming and you feel like you've got no choice. So I think we need to think on a longer term scale as a society about choice, because for me, sexual violence is the one thing where you have had every single choice taken away. We need to find a way to empower clients to have choice. Would you have liked that? Would you have liked to have got to choose your therapist to start with, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it would have saved me quite a few sessions. Yes, but I also know that I didn't want counselling back then. Mm-hmm. So I could have very much have just been the typical teenager refusing to speak to anyone. And then obviously when I did bond with you, I was like, oh, okay, she's all right. At 14 years old, like typical teenager. So I don't know. It literally depends, because you you're not going to be able to improve unless you can get on with your counsellor at all. You need that bond so you can have that trust and you can literally tell them anything, obviously within reason. But you definitely need a bond with them. But there is no, I can't think of the word. There's not enough. There's not enough going around.
Yes.
To be able to pick.
And I think as well, I suppose, if you've just got someone's picture and a bit about them, that doesn't mean necessarily you know what's going to happen in the room, or you're going to be able to feel that that is the connection that you have. And I think it's so personal. Really think counselling is such a personal journey, because you have to feel like you're safe and you can build trust. And obviously trust takes a long time, and that's the other thing that I think that is so heartbreaking for rape crisis, is that they have to reduce the number of sessions down they can offer, because they cannot balance the wait list, the demand, the pressure, the wait list and the therapy to be open-ended. And I suppose that's one of the reasons, well, it's a big part of the reason I decided to be in private practice, is because I felt that I could only get so far with clients. I would be able to give some techniques and we just start to look at the trauma they'd experienced, and then I'd have to be saying, right, we're working towards an ending. Whereas part of the work I value is that the client, in my private practice, the client very much dictates where we're at, what's going on. Obviously, I'm not going to keep you stuck, and also if you are saying the same things every single week to me, I'm going to have something to say. But I think it's the choice and the time to actually sit back and wait to then share when you're ready that I think sometimes helps. Because if you've got 18 sessions, by session 7 you're probably thinking, I've got to start saying what's happened to me, otherwise I'm not going to get it out before I end.
It definitely was that, like, then trying to rush everything, but then the little details, which are most of the time the key details, you're missing out. So then you're missing out on what you can do and how to support yourself from that, because you're missing out of those details. So it definitely was hard trying to kind of rush the counselling sessions.
Definitely. And the next question actually is quite relevant to what we've been talking about, so you might have answered some of it, but what do you think the best and the worst thing is about therapy? And you can look at this charity side of it and the private practice and be completely honest.
Okay. The best part currently is obviously just someone that I could literally unload everything on. I'd probably say the worst part is the immediate aftermath. After when you've spoke about everything, it's all in your head. You then obviously, you kind of know what to do, but it's just repeating everything that you've said in the session. And it's just bringing everything back up. But you also know that if you don't bring it back up, you're not going to recover from it. So it is just finding obviously that balance to be like, okay, it's going to be an awful night, but at least I'm improving.
That's important to say, because I always say to clients, you need to think about what you're doing before a session and after a session. And obviously life is busy, so you don't always get the chance to be like, oh, I'm just going to take 2 hours of self-care after a session. Sometimes you've got to drive to work or go home, or you've got other things to do. But I think it's important to say that, that sometimes what's brought up in the session doesn't just stay in the session. Obviously, you've got to then process it. And having the tools and techniques is one thing, but actually having space to apply them and them working always is a different thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I purposely pick mine so I can go back and just collapse in my room for a couple of hours, so I don't have to then put on a happy face and smile in front of people when my head's obviously going 1,000 miles an hour.
Definitely. So with that in mind, I guess, what do you think's really helped you along the way?
It's going to sound really cringy, but you just being there, you could always fall back onto you, in the sense of, yes, okay, I might have took a 2-year break, but I've come back now. So it's the fact that there is always someone there to support me and help me through whatever it is.
It feels like the bond, I guess, between counsellor and client is one that is hard to quantify sometimes. I find it hard to say to someone, how it works or why it works, but I think it's really important that when it's there to be, used in the right way. And that 2-year break, I think, is valuable. I think therapy should always be for a chapter of time. It doesn't mean you can't come back and revisit it. but I don't think, you should be continuously in therapy forever, because that means that we're not doing our job right. And, so much has changed in that time that I think it's been valuable to wait and see you come back. So I think it's been a really important journey. Is there anything else that you'd like to share? Obviously, the questions have brought a lot up, but is there anything else that's on your mind or you want to say?
It does get easier eventually. It takes a long time, but like for me, I barely ever think about self-harm anymore, and that used to be a daily occurrence. I 99% don't think about suicide anymore, so it does eventually help, providing that you know or work out what is best for you. So obviously face-to-face counselling might not work for everyone, but it literally just depends. But as soon as you do work it out, stick with it. It's a bit of a pain at the start, but it does eventually get better.
And I really appreciate you speaking about your experience. And I think these things are what help people when they can hear their own experience within someone else's, and when they are scared and worried about what do I do, where do I go. And that's why I kind of decided to do the podcast, because I thought, well, you don't all need me to say it, you actually need to hear lived experience. So I think it's really valuable, and I'm really grateful for you sharing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Please stay tuned for part 2 and 3. If you have any questions or need support, please reach out for help. See you soon.